And we are live on a Monday morning in December. Welcome, Dr. Bernardo. Welcome. And we have a guest too here from the West Coast, sort of from where I am, a little further west, but we have Matt Rhodes here. So welcome, Matt. And I see you have your, is that your Twitter handle there as well? So anybody wants to see that, they can follow you there. We could talk about that in a little bit. You have a book and another one coming out, I think, soon too. So very diverse background. Welcome, Rich. Matt, I'll let you introduce yourself as well.
Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Matt from San Diego. So I have my hat in a lot of different areas in education. So I'm an ed specialist at a secondary school and I'm the tech coordinator for our site. But also I am a teacher support supervisor and evaluator at San Diego State University and lecture there on ed tech. And then my background, really my research relates to data efficacy of teachers and educational leaders. So definitely been focusing more on my instructional background, which has been, I've been doing blended learning, integrating ed tech for a number of years. And then just really thinking about the idea of data literacy and what I'm doing and driving my instruction and coaching other teachers in that manner as well. And then just focusing on research-based instructional strategies that help for engagement, using the different ed tech tools, and really just trying to amplify and enhance learning as we, regardless whether we're in the pandemic or not, but just trying to push some boundaries and make learning accessible and equitable for all students. And that's kind of my background.
Excellent. So we talked a little bit offline, Matt, and people hear data literacy, and they tend to cringe, or they really either dive right into it or they cringe and like, wait, I don't know what it is. And ed tech is in that space too until the pandemic. It really was, if I feel like it. Now it's like, oh, you kind of have to, right? So it's interesting to me. Your background is very interesting because with educational technology, with data literacy, we talk about in doctoral terms, we talk about the conceptual framework, right? That lens for which you need outsiders to view or to focus on what you're talking about in your doctoral research. And it's similar in my mind to the data literacy piece, educational technology. You have to kind of hone people in to have them understand what it is you're talking about, because it's foreign to a lot of educators, right? As you get into leadership, less so, but the educational technology, not necessarily, but data less so. But how do you, in your mind or in your practice, get folks to sort of buy into what you're talking about is legitimate, has weight to it, and needs to be really focused on? And in turn, how do you say, hey, this is going to help you in XYZ ways?
I mean, I tell them everything that we're doing in a modern 21st century classroom, data is being collected. So every measurable action that we're taking, whether, we're using all these different tools now that are collecting data. And, there's so much that we're collecting now that, if you know just a little bit about it, then that's really going to enhance your instruction. We're collecting quantitative data, we're collecting qualitative data in terms of textual responses. I mean, there's so much that we're collecting now. And honestly, if you're just able to transform that data, move it onto a spreadsheet and do a little bit of, transforming that data using just some simple statistics, it's going to really drive your decision making. And then also, I think just having a little bit of background in just what are some good research-based instructional strategies, because without the strategies or without that idea of knowing what to do with that data, then that's really the big disconnect. So we all have to focus on really bridging the gap of, okay, if students are struggling in reading comprehension on these types of questions, then we have to find the strategies that can use as a means to support those students that are struggling. If we have those strategies within our toolkit, then we can use really that data to drive our instruction. So that's kind of my big philosophy on it, is that you have to have an idea of what to do when the data is telling you one thing. And really, I think just now there's so many dashboards available. There's so much tools available for you to do some simple statistics and to export your data to. It's not incredibly difficult. It's just a matter of just learning some of these techniques that probably should take about 2 to 5 minutes. It's really now easier than ever before. So I think just the focus on, not just professional development, but within credentialing programs, really focusing on this idea of data literacy, data-driven decision making, but also having some background and knowledge of like, these are the instructional strategies that we can use to help bridge these gaps in the data. So that's kind of how I feel about where we're currently at and how we can use data at this point in K-12.
So you're really providing that connective tissue in a simplified way for those who that threshold maybe is just a little in their minds too far away to achieve through those strategies, which is brilliant, which is how it should be done, right? Rich, thoughts?
Yeah, I'm trying to formulate my own premise of one based on all these impressive things that Matt's talking to. So this question is probably a little fuzzy, Matt. So you do with it whichever you want to do with it. Let me put words back in your mouth and take them out again. So obviously you're a person who can catalyze teachers. I think my question is coming more clearly to me. You're a person who can catalyze teachers to use data in order to change their strategies to meet students' needs. Yes, no?
Yes. Essentially, we're using the data to then have a big toolbox of strategies to then use those strategies to help their students.
By the way, that's one of my other favorite verbs is catalyze. So you'll hear that about 10 times.
Future and catalyzing your future, right?
Sooner or later we'll come up with organic, but that's actually maybe I'm going to speak to organic. I'm going to speak to organic right now. Which comes first, so the chicken or the egg? If I, as a teacher, relatively successful teacher, asking what I think students need to be able to practice and master in whatever class I'm teaching, it's relatively successful with using probably what I would say a low-class yardstick. And now we have the COVID crisis demanding that we use technology more readily, or even without technology, or even, even without the COVID crisis. A person like Matt comes along with this wheelbarrow filled with all kinds of goodies. How does that change the disposition to want to use those in the first place?
I think that it's all based on mindset. First, it's think less is more. I think that just use 2 to 3 tools and probably like 3 to 5 strategies max, get really good at them and know that they have a high level of efficacy anyways. And as a result, you're not going to be overwhelmed. So I think that is what it comes down to. Is I think that there's so much information that's out there. There's so much research that's out there. But I think if you just narrow your focus, then ultimately you're going to have better outcomes. Because if you're just focused on 3 to 5 things that work, then you're going to have better outcomes as a result. And basically, over time, your data will be more consistent as well, because you're using 3 to 5 of these different, similar tools as well as strategies. So I think that that's the key to success right now. And I think a lot of people get overwhelmed quickly. And I think the idea of selecting tools as well as strategies is the hardest part of all this. But I think that once you narrow those strategies down in tools, then I think everyone can focus on 3 to 5 things.
So that's really
the strategy. The strategy is to chunk it, make it make it more, get your arms around it.
digestible chunk.
But that's a new word we're beginning to use.
Digestible.
The strategy is to chunk it, digest it, get your arms around it, whichever analogy sounds best. In order for people to feel, I'm thinking out loud again, in order for a reluctant or resistant teacher or an ignorant teacher, combinations thereof, to come up with a new way to realize, I always translate new way to realize with transformation. Well, does that happen? Here it comes. I'm smiling. does that come organically as you begin to show them these little packets of, I'll call it mini strategies, for, just to make them
Yeah.
sound smaller? Is that how you get them inside out?
So this is how I like to work with teachers that are a little bit resistant. So for example, like showing how to use effect sizes and just show them like, here's like 5 or 6 things that you're doing really, really well. And these show that you're providing students feedback, which is one of the highest levels, right? So you're already doing this to an extent, but let me show you a way that you can make your life easier. Let's automate some of this feedback. Let's make it so that we don't have to spend hours on feedback, but you're still doing it at a high level. That's kind of what I like to focus on.
Yeah, and that's a great strategy. And I want to get into the ed tech piece too with you, because I know you're pretty involved with that piece as well. It brings to mind for me, Google Classroom as an example. When Google Classroom came out, there are a few teachers that bought in right away, but most were like, it sounds a little crazy. And I remember I had this one teacher who was resistant, and then finally he cracked and he's like, all right, let's try it. He did it. He said he couldn't believe how it changed his life and how little he had to do to get there. It wasn't the gap to get there wasn't as big as this particular teacher thought. And I think what you're doing here with the strategies is brilliant. I mean, that's how teachers do. For myself, I don't get overwhelmed. Doesn't sound like you do either, Matt. But to assume that others are like that is wrong, especially teachers who are wrapped up in, potentially 120 students or a crazy classroom of third graders or whatever it might be. That point is different for everybody. And I think working in those small chunks helps, whether it's educational technology, data literacy. It helps no matter what situation you're in. And if people get there faster, then you go in a little deeper, at a quicker pace, right? So we talked earlier too, offline, about how, Rich, you mentioned this as well, how in this ed tech space, a lot of what we're doing and a lot of what has happened since COVID is this sort of exponential increase in usage of educational technology, leveraging educational technology, because everybody had to. What that tells me about it is that we've had the capacity to do it all along. We're kind of choosing not to because it wasn't a priority, right? You mentioned, though, how far behind, and Rich alluded to this offline, how far behind we were. Can you speak to that and how far behind we may still be with the use and integration of educational technology in K-12 and in higher ed for that matter? We're all in that space as well. And we see a lot of the deficiencies in higher ed as well, maybe even more than K-12, to be honest with you. But can you speak to that, Matt?
Yeah, I feel that, I mean, I don't know, I've heard this from a number of people stating that, education, it's a dinosaur type industry. It goes really slow in terms of innovation and development because it's highly institutionalized. And sometimes it's not always the best thing to innovate extremely quickly, but also currently we live in a world that's just really changing quickly, and COVID just a great example of that. But I mean, in terms of just where we are compared to other industries like healthcare, I feel like we're 10 to 15 years behind in terms of some of that technology use and the data use that they're using. I mean, for example, just Watson computer can basically put in, the whole prognosis of, the symptoms of what's going on, some laboratory tests, and then, basically predict and prescribe how to help that patient. And I think that, we're not here yet in education in that regard, but I think that I see that in the next maybe 10 years if we continue the same innovations that we've been going through this year. So, I think that we are quite behind, but luckily this year, I think we were able to jump about 5 years of that gap because of just the extenuating circumstances of what we've been all going through.
And to Rich's question, Rich, you alluded to this earlier. We've talked about what's to stop everybody from going back to 15 years behind again right after this in your mind, as far as the both the data literacy and also more, probably even more so, the educational technology piece?
I think there's a number of variables that we need to think about. First is that we have to come with the message that what we're trying to do here is making your life easier as an instructor. We're making the students' lives easier as well, and we're amplifying what we're doing with the technology. So I think just first coming off with that message is that, if we can do this, we're going to make your life easier. Workflow is going to go down. We're just, continuing that coaching and mentoring too. I think if we focus on too many one-off professional developments about like a specific tool or strategy, then that's not going to be a long-lasting type of impact. So we have to focus on continuing a culture of coaching and mentoring, of using the tools that we're been starting to use all the time, and not completely deviate year to year. Continue on, 3 to 5 year type plans in relation to instruction and the tools that we're using, so that the things that we're doing now don't just get thrown out the window and everyone goes back to the way it was before this.
And the collegial sharing piece, the collaboration piece, is a residual effect of this, but a major piece. People are sharing and collaborating in ways, not just locally, across districts, across universities, to get through this time. And I hope that stays the same as well. Rich?
Yeah.
Or Matt, go ahead. You can respond as well.
I just think it's called social media intertwined with pedagogy. So we're using social networks infused with pedagogy to share and learn. And I think that that's something that really has kicked off. I don't think it's going to change. It's going to just continue to be amplified. And I think that's really a lot of the future of more higher ed education and just continued professional development. So I think that this has been a major development.
So that's, I think, our book that we're going to write together. You just stated, right? Right there. I'm teasing, of course. Rich, thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know where to begin. There's so many great ideas flying around here. I have the next book I'm going to write for one of my publishers is Artificially Intelligent Education. And it's going to be some of those consequences will come out in terms of what the things you're talking about. And another book I have coming out in June is, I forgot the title, but it's about social media and futuring as such, because that goes back to what I've been driving at before. In fact, let me drop that point, come back to another one. You mentioned, and I agree with you, that business, you mentioned healthcare. I forget what other industry you mentioned, is already 10, 15 years out in front of us, at least that in certain senses, depending where you are. Now, the question is, why or how is their models for innovation more amenable to these kinds of things than education is? And I'm not sure we can solve that in what's left of the podcast, but that's a conversation that's got to be answered.
I mean,
there's all these cross currents.
Yeah. No, I do mention in my book, in my future book, that I think having organizational frameworks that are adaptable and malleable over time, to me, and they promote risk taking and they reward risk taking and they provide that like trust-based culture for risk taking, then we'll see more innovation. If it's more compliance based and if it's more accountability type cultures, then we're not going to see the innovation. And I think that other industries reward people for being innovative, and education needs to jump on that bandwagon, because without the incentive, you don't see that innovation.
Yeah, and in education,
wow, great point. Make a bumper sticker out of that. That's exactly correct.
And in education, higher ed especially, but also K-12, innovation, creating new program. I've created a ton. Rich, you've created a ton. I'm sure, Matt, you have as well. Those are always the first to get cut. Those are always the afterthought, but they really should be the bloodline of K-12 and higher education. And it's trying to have leaders at the top understand that. I guess safe, so that kind of safe mentality or safe leadership hires the same kind of leadership, right? So it sort of perpetuates a culture that's not innovative. in all of these organizations. But hopefully that will change if we get the word out, and kind of allow people to realize, hey, this is what needs to be done. This is why it needs to be done.
Yeah, there's so many elements to it. I mean, it's definitely not something that's easy, but I think that if people continue to focus on the idea that, risk taking should be something that's rewarded and should be something that is basically people are given that opportunity within their classrooms and schools without having a major consequence, then I think that hopefully we'll see some more of those breakthroughs. And I think just also, I like what George Couros has to say with the innovator's mindset, and just talking about how just intertwining the idea of growth mindset with the idea of taking risks and trying new things. And that's going to help us over time really change our practices.
So I want to wrap up here in just a few minutes. Love to have you back, Matt, as well. You have one book out now. I just want to give you a quick opportunity to show that, and they can get that where too, Matt?
You can get this book on Amazon. It can't really see with my background, but it's Navigating the Toggle Term, Parent Secondary Education, Educators for Navigating 2020 and Beyond. That's on Amazon. And then I have a project coming out in Q1 of 2021, which is basically just a lot more content, just stories from educators across North America relating to how they are navigating these instructional and logistical challenges that we're facing today.
That sounds really, really interesting. So we'll put that link in the comments area wherever these videos are. These will be on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn. Share away, Matt, and feel free to put your links to your book now, and then when the other one comes out, you could add that as well. So closing thoughts. Rich, you go, and then we'll let Matt finish up. I'll chime in and let Matt finish up.
Well, I'm encouraged by a person like Matt Rhodes. And I'm sure you've heard this before, Matt, but I can't hurt to say it again. We need a lot more Matt Rhodes to create the critical mass, to truly do enable that kind of transformation that all of us, the three of us, and many more people are frustrated that it hasn't moved fast enough. And we have to figure out lots of ways to network among each other to influence that many more people to, another one of my favorite phrases, and it's certainly not original, to drink the Kool-Aid. But when that implies something, drinking Kool-Aid implies something bad. What we're talking about, drinking Kool-Aid to feel the same way about a new way to realize what we should be doing with students. Thank you very much.
No,
Yeah, Matt, good.
No, I totally agree. I think it's totally a collective effort. And I think just what we talked about earlier with social media infused pedagogy, I think that we have an opportunity to really spread this message. And just one quick story. Yesterday, I was listening to a podcast about trust-based observations, and they talked about a new rubric with a whole area set for being innovative and risk-taking and really promoting that. So I'm starting to see it more and more. And I think that just more conversations like we're having today and your guys' platform is starting that. So I think that is huge. And I think there's a lot of really exciting things coming in the future. And hopefully, after this crisis is over, we don't go back to quote unquote normal in education.
And Matt, I want to thank you and your experience is really an asset for you, but others I think will listen to what you're saying, because you have your foot in K-12, you have your foot in higher ed, you have a good grasp of what's going on in the industry as well. We are educating our students to be successful in the world, and a lot of this, your views encompass sort of this holistic piece of what we need to look at from a societal perspective, from a perspective of the educational system overall. And that's an important perspective to pay attention to. So like Rich said, appreciate what you're doing. Love to have you back again if you're willing and able. So thank you so much for what you're doing. We really appreciate it. And we really appreciate the time that you've been on the show here.
Thank you, guys.